Well, hello. Welcome to World Building Wednesday with your man here, DBJ. Thanks for taking a Demi Daily deep dive with me. Today, we will talk about 10 tips for creating unique cultures in your setting. Now, these tips aren't, of course, exclusive. They aren't the only ones. They are mine. And they aren't the only things that I use when trying to create like a unique culture or location in my worlds. So this came about through it was just a couple of comments on on a chat when I was on a panel and we were talking about creating our different supplements and an upcoming creation of ours, which is going to be a pretty big book, is going to be called, or as of right now, will be called Cityscapes. And there was a comment about making cities with various cultures, and it was like, well, and the comment was like, well, what about like Russian or Persian cities or Middle Eastern or something like that? And our response was, well, they're going to be culturally agnostic, and the impression was that the individual was thinking that we were ignoring or afraid of other cultures, but I think they didn't realize that they were assuming that we were using a Middle European basis for cities, and that's not the case. And so, um, for this world building uh, live stream, we're just going to talk about how to create new cultures by basically, you can just use examples of real world cultures and then start to segment them so that although you have a touchstone, you have a reference for the real world, they aren't lifted wholly from a culture we have here, to appropriate that culture and then kind of turning it into a stereotype. So we're going to split up what we know about cultures and then take those ideas and then apply them to our world building techniques. So let's get into it. In no particular order, let's talk about dress, clothing, what people wear in your setting. And now, of course, you can subdivide this down to: is it the entire setting? Is this just major cities? Is it based on region? But you can take clothing styles. So, for example, whether it's thick furs or silks or sarongs or wraps around the body or um, embroidery or tight pants and tight shirts, or whether it's not wearing very much at all, you can use, and I suggest just using bullet points. So you don't have to necessarily write out a whole dissertation on these 10 tips. These can be 10 bullet points. And then if you wish, you can add a couple of more lines under each bullet point so that you can very quickly reference something. Or if you need to give it to your player characters, and to give to your players so that they can create their characters, you just go, hey, listen, we've got these 5 nations. Oh, here we go with the buffering again. All right, so we've got these 5 nations. Here are some, 5 to 10 bullet points. Go ahead and make your character. So one part is dress. How do they dress? Is it gender specific, like males and females wear specific things? Are there other genders in your world in this particular region, and are they dressed separately? Is there different dress based on status, rich and poor? Is there dress based on political affiliations, factions, guilds, those kind of things? And dress can have an important impact if it alerts people as to their station in life, their purpose, whether they're security or military or guardsmen and women, medical, those kind of things. So dress can also be something like jewelry. Maybe they wear lots of bracelets and tiaras and torques on their arms and bracers and medallions and rings. Maybe they do not go adorned at all. Maybe jewelry is made out of wood or bone, and or leather, those kind of things. So, for example, in the television show Vikings, it was very important for them to have the I'm calling it the world serpent, um, braided metal ring around the arm. It had a very large cultural significance in terms of earning one or being granted one in the culture. So, number two would be food. Um, Again, you don't need to have a long dissertation on this. If with food, just describe the kinds of foods they eat and maybe how they eat it, how they consume it, and maybe there are cultural uh, significance to it. For example, maybe the people eat one very extremely large meal first thing in the morning, and then they don't particularly eat anything the rest of the day. And that could be kind of off-putting for, you know, people who are getting hungry, but maybe they're just used to it. Maybe eating doesn't have as much family importance to these people. Maybe it's purely just a function of consuming nutrients and going about your business. Or, for example, food can be a communal thing where it doesn't matter who you know or what you're doing, even if you're enemies, you are to gather together and drink, coffee or tea. And this is a point where, even hated enemies can come together, talk over, spiced mead or something like that. And again, this can be very important for the culture. Also, the kind of foods they eat can describe where they live. Are they coastal? Do they eat a lot of shellfish, or do they eat a lot of fish from the rivers and seas? Do they eat lots of fruits and vegetables? Is it plentiful here? The kind of meats, especially in a fantasy world, you can start to, do dwarves eat, baked purple worm, those kind of things. So that can be pretty interesting, especially if let's say a very dangerous predator or creature or something is runs rampant in one part of the world, and the other part of the world is just another delicacy, like rust monster or black pudding or something like that. So the third one are greetings, and this I tend to like to use tips and in describing cultures when it impacts the player characters. Like, what do they see, what do they touch, what do they smell and feel immediately that gives them a hint as to how these people act. And sometimes just a simple greeting can be worth a lot. Do people handshake? Do they wave? Do they bow? Are When people greet each other, is it based on age, that the most noticeably older individual must acknowledge first before the younger ones? Or do younger people defer to their elders immediately? When someone greets each other, do they reach forward with their what would be normally their weapon arm, or their defensive arm with their other hand on the hilt of their sword? Um, are greetings very complicated, and do they require knowledge of a culture where someone has to say something first, and then the other person says something second, and then that response requires another thing. You can make greetings very complicated or very easy, and that in turn can dictate what that culture is like. Are they very just casual, like, hey, how you doing? Or is it a matter of feeling each other out? So you can even write down a specific turn of phrase, like good day, my friend, or something, or hello, stranger. What is it that I can do for you? Or hold fast and state your business, or something like that. And that can just kind of give an example of, for yourself, to go, oh yeah, these people are pretty paranoid, so they're not really very open to just walking up to strangers. Um, Next one is our arms and armament. I put down arms, meaning like weapons, armor, maybe even siege weapons, those kind of things. What is a very common or unique or culturally specific kind of weapon used in your world? You can go down a deep rabbit hole if you Google, swords or spears or medieval weaponry from various cultures, and this is a great time to use those things. Now, if we break into the mechanics, especially, it doesn't matter what game it is, but especially fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, which is very popular. You don't need to have hyper specific rules and regulations on weapons. Weapons tend to be good or bad in the uh, arms of the wielder. So, a katana is not necessarily that much better than, a Middle European longsword. It's just the wielder, and you can go down a rabbit hole of reality versus fantasy. Don't do. I suggest don't do that. Um, there are there are lots of variables involved in it. I would just say use that as as a touchstone, as a guide as to what these people are like. For example, it's not just what weapons they have, but why. The creation and use of a katana has a specific it requires a specific skill, and maybe these people have a lot of detail when constructing their weaponry. Prue Prue says, I remember when I changed martial arts, I got corrected for the way I bowed. In jiu-jitsu, I learned to maintain eye contact when bowing, but in Aikido, it was considered rude. And see how it's like a subtlety that you could add into a culture. For example, let's say there are two communities near each other, and that is the difference from one community to another. And maybe seeing that act when someone bows and whether they hold eye contact or not could tell you where they're from. Also, Prue Prue says distrustful in an act of aggression, right? So, in one hand, maybe keeping contact is just a very polite thing to do. On the other hand, in the other culture, they could say, well, you're keeping eye contact with me. You're threatening me, and I'm ready to go for my weapon. So yes, the types of weaponry that people use. I mean, you could go down the laundry list of like katana. I mean, if you just talk about swords, you've got katanas and great swords and butterfly knives and tai chi, swords and ninja ken or ninja toe, those kind of things. And so you can, and remember, you do not need to use that specific culture. So for example, your culture doesn't have to be Asian for someone to say use a katana. It could just be that is the weapon of choice for them and becomes a cultural part of their world. So basically what I'm saying is you can take a culture and separate, for example, I just talked about clothing, foods, greetings, and their armament. Pick like your top 5 cultures in the world that you want to use, and then separate them out from indigenous people here, or also called Native Americans, to from the States, East Indian, to Japanese, to people from Thailand or Mongolia or Central Africa, and you can start to mix and blend them together. So another number, I guess 5 here is education. How, and not just educating young people, but how is information passed from one person to another? Do they use ravens for communication? Do they are people? Do they gather for a bardic's tale in a tavern? Is information held tight? Are people do they have libraries? Are there specific individuals that you go to when you need to transfer information from one to another? Do they have books? Do they use scrolls? Do they use cave paintings or hieroglyphics of some sort? Do they use rods that are constructed of brass and wood and bone that you can move and manipulate like mysterious puzzle that reveals some particular types of information. Are you can with education you can go with magic. Do they use spell books, or are there runes and or glyphs painted on the skin of skinned animal where there's a fur, and on the inside you see these hand painted pictographs or something. So education is just a big umbrella for information and how information is transferred from one person to another, and that can give you a hint as to how open or closed the society is. The levels of importance of education. If you have a public library is a big deal in a medieval world, as opposed to the information held specifically with a small cadre of wizards or sages or something. Next, we're going to go to weather. Number 6, weather is can dictate the culture as well, and also hot and humid. Does it rain? Are they used to floodwaters? What about swampy areas? Does it? Are there earthquakes? Do they have flash fires? So weather can be a big deal. What do they batten down the hatches during storm season? Maybe they are very used to it. This is a hot and arid location, and so water is extremely valuable, maybe far more than coin or spices or something. Weather also is a great indicator of the skills that people have. So in one community, for example, let's continue with the hot and arid location in a desert region. Your forest dwellers may not know how to find adequate water, but maybe as a young child, you know where to find maybe these tough and hardy plants, and know to dig down at least an arm's length to find maybe a pool of water or something like that. Or maybe they're used to scorpions. Scorpion starts climbing up their leg, and the little 8-year-old kid just grabs the scorpion by the tail like it's no big thing. Whereas your mountain dweller may be like very paranoid about these scorpions crawling over their body and might accidentally get stung. So that's another element of where one form of people may find something to be dangerous. Another form is just, oh, that's just part of society. Hey, it's storm season, flash floods coming in. Maybe their homes are built on stilts, and if people arrive during the dry season, they may wonder why are all houses built up 10 feet high on stilts, and then you realize there's 3 months of floods, and so they need to build their homes up high, and that's just an excuse to do that. Again, you don't need to dive so deeply into a lot of detail. I suggest just doing bullet points, and then you can fill out those bullet points for yourself, but the bullet points allow the player characters to kind of like scratch their chin like, wonder what's going on. Also, when you use the weather, it's a great opportunity to have a number of things to impact the players. For example, if the community is built up on stilts, what if they have a fight, and then instead of just hacking and slashing somebody, it might be a good idea to just kick someone in the chest and knock them off of a platform or something into maybe the mud below them, or the dry ground, or maybe there are predators that when the flood season comes in, the crocodiles and giant snakes and such, and giant frogs start coming through the community, and this is the best way to avoid them. Next, with the environment is the weather. Number 7. The environment and the weather go hand in hand, but they don't necessarily need to meet. For example, the environment is, where is the city? Is it subterranean? Is it floating in the air? Is it a coastal location? Is it built into a cliffside? Is it on a vast plain? Is it around an oasis? Usually cities are built in places where they have access to trade. So along river routes, as land travel or air travel becomes possible, they can be located in central locations. And then as society gets very advanced. They may have locations that are because of personal reasons. Someone picked this place because it looks good. Someone else picked this place because it sits on a fount of magic. Um, Las Vegas here in the States is a perfect example of a building. If you build it, they will come. Built in the middle of a desert, purchase up a lot of property. Criminals say, hey, this is a haven for you to come to engage in all of your wildest desires. Come on in. So environment is a big deal. Do they have landslides or earthquakes or mudslides or and those kind of things? And yes, the weather can impact that, but also um, it it goes towards the construction of the city. Is it made mainly out of like stone and rock and marble, or do they use local plant life and just use wood or reeds to construct their homes? Are they temporary homes, kind of from a nomadic past, or have they been here for centuries and built into the environment? And of course, if you have fantasy, you can build communities in trees and they're grown inside of trees. Or are they nomadic and they live on the backs of giant crabs or turtles or something like that? You can go very wild with it. I suggest that you do in a fantasy setting, and then even in sci-fi settings, habitats versus in space versus dome cities inside of craters. The environment can dictate how they live, and it can also be used as a defensive measures for the city. It could also be a problem for the city. For example, maybe the location was built at the base of a mountainside, at a mountain pass, with the intention of having a parallel city on the other side of the mountain pass, but maybe a huge mountain slide cut them off. Or maybe it is a location, and this is the one safe place to get between the two mountain passes. There's another city on the other side, and in between this mountain pass is where these people live in a crevice where it's almost vertical or what have you. So we've got three more. Number seven, number 8 would be security. Security would just be like guards, policing the law, defending the city against hostile invaders, hostile predators, and defending itself against, of course, the environment. So security is based on, do the people support a very invasive security? So are guards allowed to go into private homes? Are people allowed to be accosted on the street for what would seem to be no reason? Is interrogation and being questioned a common thing? Or is this I have rights, you don't have the right to talk to me any way you want? Do they use very extensive legal systems, or is this just very a communal, hey, this person committed a crime, I think they harmed me, and then everyone just comes before the Jarl, and the Jarl just passes judgment for good or bad? Also about security and the law. Is the law fair or just? And in other words, is the law meant to look for the truth, and do people value the truth for good or bad? Or is it, what's the most expedient way we can solve a situation so we can get back to going about our society? Prue says, I find even finding out whether the police and the military are very separated on the or the same can be very telling. Yes. Is the military just another arm of the police, or are the police a specialized unit of individuals that investigate crime? Because this was once said in the Bruce Willis movie, like, it's the difference between a hammer and a scalpel. The police may have investigation techniques. They may have psychics on the police force. They may have the use of dogs or other kind of animals that can detect very slight traces of a criminal's passing, and they may be sensitive to the community, especially if they are members of the community. They need to find a criminal, but they also don't want to offend people, and so they might be very sensitive of what they do and how they say it. Whereas the military might just be, is a very blunt instrument, and it's just like, look, you do as I say, or else sword to the throat of innocent people, back off. Hey, we can't find a criminal. Great. Arrest those 10 people. We're going to charge them all and see if the criminal, pokes their head out or something. So also it goes to show how much authority the leadership in the community has. Is it one overriding authority, or is it made up of a number of different factions or guilds, and each faction or guild controls a portion of the security? For example, you could have a faction that does nothing but investigate something. This faction is hired to investigate the truth for good or bad. And then another faction may be the muscle. They are trained in arms and armament, and their job is to have, engage in physical violence if necessary. And then maybe a third is used to incarcerate criminals. They are the punishing arm. They do the interrogations. They do public flogging, or and those kind of things. So you may have different guilds so that the power doesn't rest in one hand, one person's hand, or the community could just be very egalitarian. They could just be very open. Hey, we are the current hunters and gatherers, or we're the ones who are the best with swords and armament. So it's kind of our job, like a classic Midwestern stateside environment where you have the town marshal, and the town marshal is just a guy with some common sense and trust in the community, and just goes, okay, well, let's all get together in a town hall and hash this out, figure out who did it. Okay, so number 9 is art. Art, it can be very telling of a community. Do they like painting or song or dance? Do they like carvings? Is art respected, or is it something that is at this time ignored? If a community is under harsh outside influences, whether it's on a war footing, or invasion, or spies, or a lot of city violence, money and effort and technique going to art may not be a thing. Although if the people are working hard to survive, maybe art is the kind of thing that allows them to wind down. So are the people, you have this classic idea of dwarves, like they work hard, they work together, they work these 16-hour days, and then when they're finally off work, they get to wind down with strong drink, dance, song, those kind of things, so that they can so that their art is like carousing and dance, and maybe even friendly name calling, arm wrestling, sports, all of those things are their idols erected to heroes or the gods. Artwork can be, in all of the arts, can be used as one or more to describe the culture. For example, are there banners strung across the city in honor of great heroes in war? And this can give a telling that, hey, you might not want to disrespect the name or the actions of great heroes. On the other hand, let's say there are banners that are strung around the city in honor of vanquished enemies. Maybe these people are great warriors, but they also like to honor the dead. Are bards annoying, or are bards cherished in these communities? Storytellers, dancers, singers, acrobats and jugglers, operatic singers, poets, storytellers that tell of legends of the old. All of these things can be used, and just a couple of bullet points could be very valuable. Maybe Prue says artists are traditionally hired to make propaganda too. Exactly. So let's assume that you have a very evil regime. Propaganda could, teach people that yeah, our regime is evil, but it's a necessary evil, or convincing people that the lizard folk on the other side of the ridge are they eat human flesh and they're very evil, and if you ever see one you should run from them, or if confronted don't believe their lies, you should kill them. Whereas the lizard folk might be like, those humans on the other side of the ridge, they're kind of interesting people. Maybe we should befriend them. We don't know much about them. Let's send some dignitaries over there, and then they might be slaughtered on their way over by scouts who are modified by the influenced by the propaganda of their own community. So artists in general, and the use of art is just it's the creation of an idea over using various media. Live and Let Dice says maybe instruments are a sign of great wealth, or perhaps art comes from a unique source like ivory. And that goes back to things in the community, where they live. So for example, you mentioned ivory. Does the ivory come from elephants? Is the ivory come from the bone of their fallen enemies? Do they, is it in this culture using the bones of their own fallen, not adversaries, but their own fallen people? Is this a normal thing? A flute made from the long bone of the thigh of a loved one after their body was, placed in acid might seem very, very like disgusting to some and very honorable to others. Even the accumulation of wealth may not be through coin, but might be through great works of art, or even stolen art from other cultures. Hey, I have this, great lizard folk statuette that was acquired from a great raid 37 cycles ago, and this is great for our community. So the last note, that bullet point that you can use, number 10, would be organizations. Not just organizations such as factions or guilds, but how organized the people are. So is the community run by one overlord or overarching organization, or are there many factions? Do guilds hold power, or is the power held by political appointees? Does the farming community hold power and sway over nobles? Is blood more important than merit? And each city or community side by side may have all of the other elements. The other 9 elements may be similar, but how they are organized might be a telling thing. So when the player characters arrive, is there a lot of chaos? Can things get done very easily by people because they're very organized? Or when the building of an aqueduct to get water into the city, is this a big deal because money and funds and personnel need to be applied to it, but no one wants to do the work? Or maybe it's for personal reasons that some say, well, my family name needs to be in the public eye, and my family is the one that designed it, so I should have the honor of making the first stone, or building digging the first hole for this aqueduct. And then there's another faction or guild or organization that says, well, we're the ones that are carving out the stone to be used for the aqueduct. And then another community is like, yeah, but we're the river folk, and you're using water from our river, and we're allowing you to use it, so we should have control over the aqueduct and how much water is used, if any. And so you could have this idea where the aqueduct it's just a piece of paper and a dream, and then all these people are scrambling over who owns the rights and the honor and the public admiration for creating this thing, and then you could have another community that could care less. They're just like, look, let's just get this done. A couple of months, let's all work together. Maybe the community comes out and they make pastries and give water and grog to those that are working hard to knock this out, because we need this water now in this city, because our central well dried up and the river is 3 miles away. We need clean water. Let's get to work. So also organizations, criminal organizations can apply. Military, royal organizations. Is there a spy network? Or is there black marketeers? Are the guilds split into various functions? Is there a carpenter's guild and a blacksmith's guild and a poisoner's guild and a herbalist's guild and a group of sages? Or are there very few organizations that do all of those things, but of various qualities? So you can have very, very high quality, very expensive, but very dependable organization that says, yes, oh, you want a poison? Yeah, we can get you one. No problem. 8,000 gold pieces, right? Where you can have another organization that's like bare bones, street level, shaking hands in the dark alley, like, yeah, I can get you some poison, 5 gold. But there's a chance that when you get it, it may not work, or you might just get poisoned by it, or what have you, or it doesn't do what it's meant to do. It just knocks the person out instead of killing them, or what have you. So maybe instead of knocking out a person so you can kidnap them, it turns their skin purple for 24 hours, something silly like that. So anyway, to summarize, we have ourselves dress, foods, greetings, arms and armament, education and communication, weather, environment. Those two go hand in hand. Security, art, and organizations. Those are just very general bullet points. Some or all may not apply to your setting, but I thought I'd just give some ideas about world building. And it just kind of came up with in my head because of like I said earlier in the chat, that I was in another panel in a chat where someone was like, well, basically like, don't be afraid of adding culture or other cultures into your city. And the fact, it's kind of a weird thing, because the fact that it was made to me, because I'm very clearly African American, Middle European culture isn't necessarily the kind of my go-to as an identifying cultural norm. So maybe that's just where other people default to. But being able to take world cultures we have today as a baseline, and then start to separate them out in little bits and pieces. And yes, you can actually use stereotypes of those cultures, break them apart in groups of 10s, like, okay, how do they dress? Oh, they wear robes and sarongs. Okay, what is their food? Well, okay, I'll use a stereotype of Japanese culture for the dress. I'll use Middle European for food. I'll use North American for arms and armament. Like, you can actually mix and match things, and then to come up with your own unique kind of culture. If people are very like Viking-esque, but they use arms and armament that is very classic, samurai and Japanese, you can come up with ideas like, did they lose part of their culture? Do they have honor, or are they more like a Viking type where they raid and such? Why is it that they can create these weapons of high quality, but their demeanor in social instances is very much like brutal and seat of the pants? And so it could be the downfall of their culture. It could be the rise of their culture. It could be something that was stolen. It could be just a simple, for some strange reason, there's a very high level of pride in creating their weapons and armor to go into battle, so that they can be seat of the pants and brutal and such. Whereas maybe you then have another culture that is very highly regimented and feels very stereotypically Japanese, but their weapons and armor are just very brutal, big giant swords and axes and chainmail, rusted chainmail and helmets. But when it comes to social interactions, they value their culture. They're very quiet, very introspective, and maybe this is a method for them to express their to allow them to excise their inner demons and rage and such. And that's just trying to mix like Viking culture with Japanese culture and not blending them, but separating them into their component parts. But you can do that with anything. So anyway, I am, of course, DBJ. It's time for the commercial commercial break. So thank you guys for joining me. I hope this is helpful. It's just a little thing that I can add. I'm sure you guys have plenty of ideas as well. I'd love to hear them. So I'm DBJ. I do a daily deep dive Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. if you are unsure on this channel. Each day is a different subject. Monster Mondays, Tips and Tricks Tuesdays, World Building Wednesdays, Third Pillar Thursdays, and Eclipse Phase Fridays for my sci-fi fans out there. I'm a contributing writer to Critical Hit Publishing. And my baby, my brainchild is the Cinematic Environs. Look for us, join us on Facebook. And I also poke my head into Absolute Tabletop's Facebook group, as well as the RPG Brigade, and every once in a while the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition group. So anyway, I'm DBJ. Thanks you for joining me. Have a pleasant day. I'm out.